Hello everyone, welcome back to this series. This is Mohammed Aljaber. In this series we are looking at chapter 5 exercises, and in this particular video we're going to be looking at an interesting exercise 5-6a. So let's read it together. Snowden Industries produces two electronic decoders, P and Q. Decoder P is more sophisticated and requires more programming and testing than does decoder Q. Because of these product differences, the company wants to use activity-based costing to allocate overhead costs. It has identified 4 activity pools. Relevant information follows, and these are the 4 activity pools, as you can see: repair and maintenance on assembly machine, programming costs, software inspections, and product testing. And for each one of these pools, they have also determined an appropriate cost driver. Okay. And then we have another table that gives us the expected activity for each of the products. Okay. So they are expecting that decoder P is going to require 16,000, or they're going to produce 16,000 units, and they would require 2,000 programming hours and 190 inspections, okay, and 1,400 tests. For decoder Q, they are planning to produce 36,000 units, and that would require 1,500 programming hours, 60 inspections, and 1,100 tests. Okay, let's look at what's required. What's required here is A, compute the overhead rate for each activity pool. Okay, so for each of these activity pools right here, we're going to determine an allocation rate, right? And then B, determine the overhead cost allocated to each product. Okay, now don't get scared by the length of this question and the detail of this question. Similar to what we have done in class, what we've done in previous exercises, same rules apply. All we need to do is get our cost pool costs, okay, divided by the cost driver, and that will give us the allocation rate. So that would give us the first requirement. Then take that allocation rate and multiply it by each activity, right? So if we determine, for example, for the first one, that the repair and maintenance on assembly machines, 104,000, okay, that's the total cost. What's the total the cost driver here is the number of units produced. So what's the total number of units produced? 52,000. So all we're gonna do here is take 104,000 divided by the total number of units produced, 52,000, and that will give us the allocation rate. In this case would be 2. Then we take that 2 and we multiply it by 16,000 to calculate the allocated cost of repair and maintenance on assembly machine for decoder P, and then again take that 2 and multiply it by 36,000, which is the number of units produced for decoder Q, and that will give us the allocated repair and maintenance on assembly machine for decoder Q. Okay, so let's go over it together. I'm gonna create a schedule here. I'll try to make my font size a little bit smaller because we're gonna need space. So I'm gonna say activity pool, and I'm gonna use shortcuts for these. I'll try to make them as short as possible. So repair and maintenance, I'll call it R&M for short. And then the second activity is programming costs, so we'll call it PC. Third one, software inspections, we'll call it SI for short. And the fourth activity, product testing, so we'll call it PT. Okay. and then I will copy the costs, which will represent the cost to be allocated. Okay, 104,000 for R&M. For programming costs, 168,000. For software inspections, 12,000. And for product testing, 16,000. Okay. Then we need to determine the cost driver. So for repair and maintenance, they said that the cost driver is going to be the number of units produced. What is the total number of units produced here? 52,000. Okay, so I'm going to divide that by 52,000. What about programming costs? The cost driver is number of programming hours. Total number of programming hours is given to us here, 3,500. So we'll include this as our cost driver. For software inspections, the cost driver is number of inspections, and the number of the total number of inspections is given to us here, 250. So we will write 250. Okay. And finally, for product testing, the 16,000, the cost driver is number of tests. We have the total number of tests here, 2,500. So I'll write 2,500. Okay. Now all we need to do is divide the cost to be allocated by the cost driver. And that will give us the allocation rate. Okay. So here, allocation rate. Let's use the calculator and figure out each allocation rate. 104,000 divided by 52,000. We already calculated that earlier. That's 2. Okay, so that's $2 per unit produced. Then 168,000 divided by 3,500. That will give us $48 per programming hour. So let's write it so you also know what that is. So this is $2 per unit. This is $48 per programming hour, PH I'll call it. And then for SI, 12,000 divided by 250. That's also $48 per inspection. And then for the last one, PT, product testing, 16,000 divided by 2,500. That will be 6.4. So that's $6.4 per test. Okay, so these are our allocation rates. All right. Now we can allocate the cost for each of the decoders, right? So we have decoder P, and we have decoder Q. Okay. We need the weight, and from the weight we can calculate the allocated cost. So again here I'll write weight and allocated costs. Okay, so let's copy the weights which we already have in the second table right here, all of these. Now this data is going to be very important to us. So for decoder P, for R&M, we said that the cost driver is the number of units, right? And we used the 52,000 here, as you can see, to determine that the allocation rate is $2 per unit produced. Now all we need to do is see how many units of decoder P was produced, which is this right here, 16,000 units. So that will be the weight. Let me change colors. 16,000. Okay. And for decoder Q, it was 36,000. So I'll just copy these. Right. For PC, we used number of programming hours. How many programming hours were carried out for decoder P? It was 2,000. So I'll write 2,000. And for decoder Q, it was 1,500. So I'll write it right here. Okay. For SI, we used number of inspections. The decoder P was responsible for 190 inspections. So that's going to be its weight. And decoder Q was responsible for only 60 inspections. And finally, for PT, we used the number of tests as our cost driver. Decoder P was responsible for 1,400 tests. So I'll write it right here. And decoder Q was responsible for 1,100 tests. All right. Now all we need to do is multiply the weight by the allocation rates for each activity pool. Okay. So here, decoder P, the weight for R&M is 16,000. I multiply it by the allocation rate of R&M, which is $2 per unit. So that will be 16,000 multiplied by 2. That will give me 32,000. $32,000. And again, the $36,000 here also multiplied by 2. 36,000 multiplied by 2. That is 72,000 dollars. And do the same for each activity. Okay, so for the next activity, the weight is 2,000, the allocation rate 48. So I'll say 48 multiplied by 2,000. That's 96,000. $96,000. And for decoder Q, it's only 1,500 programming hours multiplied by 48. That's 72,000. $72,000. Next activity, 190 inspections multiplied by $48 per inspection. So that would be 9,120. And for decoder Q, it's only 60 inspections. So 60 inspections multiplied by $48, the cost of each inspection. That's 2,880. 2,880. And for the last one, each test would cost $6.40 multiplied by 1,400 tests for decoder P. So 1,400 multiplied by 6.4. That is 8,960. $8,960. And for decoder Q, 1,100 tests multiplied also by $6.40. That will be $7,040. Sorry. Let's use green again. $7,040. All right. Now, all we need to do is tally up the total. Okay? For each one, we need to know the total overhead allocated for each decoder. So for decoder P, we're going to say 32,000 plus 96,000 plus 9,120 plus 8,960. That will give us, let's use blue, $146,080. For decoder Q, 72,000 plus another 72,000 plus 2,880 plus $7,040. And that will give us 153. Let's use green. 153,920 dollars. Okay. So, if you want to answer the question straight on, you could say total allocated costs for decoder P equals $146,080, and the total allocated costs for decoder Q equals 153,920. Okay. The question did not ask for it, but you could also go ahead and calculate the per unit numbers, basically by dividing each allocated cost by the number of units produced. So we'll take the 146,000, which is this one here, okay, 146,080, and divide it by 16,000 units. Let me do it. 146,080 divided by 16,000 units. In case the question asks you, you could say that would be 9,000. Let me move this first down just a little bit so I can have enough space to include the per unit numbers. So that would be $9.13 per decoder or per unit. And for decoder Q, 153,920 divided by the number of units, which is 36,000 for decoder Q. That will give us a cost per decoder of $4.20, rounding up $28 per decoder. Okay, because sometimes for similar questions, the question might also ask you for the per unit allocated costs. That would, in case the question asks for that, you can also do this. All right, but here they're just asking to determine the overhead cost allocated to each product, and we already did that. So decoder P, the total allocated cost or the overhead allocated cost is $146,080. For decoder Q, it's $153,920. All right, that would be the answer to this exercise 5-6A. Hope you found the video useful, and I'll hope to see you in the next one. Take care.